Professors Association webinar entitled Brain-Minded Parenting, Nurturing Children's Compassion with Dr. Silvia Casabianca, licensed mental health counselor. My name is Aaron Norton, and I'm the president of FMHCA, and I'll be your moderator today. Now, I want to get a little bit of information about you, our audience, today by launching a couple polling questions. 82% of you are licensed professionals, 5% interns, 11% students, 3% educators, and 11% other. So it's a pretty even split between these four learning objectives. 27% of you interested in the neuroscience of empathy and compassion, 27% in responding empathically to a child's emotional needs, 20% to the effects on the child of co-regulation of affection, and 27% on parenting style based on fear causes and environmental trauma. 80% of you are parents, and 27% of you are grandparents, and 57% of you are the children of parents. I don't understand the number for that option, but maybe we'll delve into that a little bit more. So then we'll go with, what's that?
How you identify, right? What's your role?
Yeah.
You identify more like a child of a parent, or, you know.
Good point. So 59% of you responded with, you tried to be conscious of how your parenting affected you. And the second most popular response at 34% significantly diverged from your own caregiver's methods. 23% of you said none of the above apply to me. 14% said you followed your parents' same parameters and principles, and 9% said you didn't follow any parameters, you mostly improvised. All right. So without further ado, I am going to introduce today's presenter. After practicing medicine for many years in Colombia, Dr. Casabianca's work with adolescents inspired Silvia to make a career change. She traveled to Montreal, where she got a master's in art therapy in Montreal in 1992. Back to her country, she created a nonprofit that offered paths for youth to develop autonomy, critical thinking, and resiliency. Her pedagogic philosophy led her to partner up with Fundación para la Actualización de la Educación in 1992, a nonprofit that had implemented an innovative school in Bogota. Applying a humanistic approach to education, Silvia opened her own small but successful school in Cartagena. After 10 years, unfortunately, the school had to close when unforeseen circumstances made her move with her father to the United States. She's a licensed mental health counselor with a practice in Naples, Florida, and is the director of Eyes Wide Open, a wellness and awareness company. She's been a guest speaker several times at the FMHCA annual conference. She also facilitates classes and workshops in Colombia, her natal country, and in the US where she lives, on stress, emotion regulation, and also on the science of parenting and a pedagogy driven by love, not fear, to raise empathic individuals who can connect with others, care for their bodies, and respect the planet. Her last book, Heart-Minded, Conscious Evolution from Fear to Solidarity, was released at the beginning of this year. Dr. Casabianca argues that humans are hardwired for empathy, love, and compassion, and that since these gifts reside in our genes, our physiology, our chemistry, they can be nurtured and developed. If consciously nurtured, they can be used to solve many of the problems we struggle with, from the interpersonal to the geopolitical. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Silvia Casabianca.
Good afternoon. You know, this is the first time that I teach a webinar. I've been teaching forever, but this is the first time that I teach a webinar, and it's a little strange to not be able to see my audience. So I wish that I could interact with you. I'm probably not going to be able to pay attention to chats at the same time that I am going through our topics, but if you want to interact with me later, I will be so happy. Just email me. You can call me. I'll give you the phone number at the end, and we can discuss whatever you feel that you want to discuss about this. I'm very passionate about this. I believe that they committed a lot of errors with me when I was growing up. So I think this is the real background. Is I didn't agree with the parenting methods that were applied in those days. I didn't agree with the way pedagogy education was applied, and mostly because it was based on fear. So that's been my big concern. And after I learned that, empathy, now that we know so much about neuroscience, now that we know that empathy is hardwired in us, then I started to wonder, how do we explain the status of the world? If we're wired for empathy and compassion, what's going on? So I need to look at education and parenting. These are my two focus. I actually went back to school. I'm doing a doctorate with Nova, and because I want to develop more research skills so that I can continue pursuing this passion of mine and find some answers on these questions that I have. So this is our topic today. And I call it brain-minded parenting. So it is a parenting that is based on what we know about science and the mind. And we want to, and the purpose of this is to nurture children for compassion. Here's my website, and you can, sometimes in these times of coronavirus, it's not so updated as I wanted because there's not a lot of activity. I hope that, one of the things that frustrates me about doing a webinar is that I'm going to be talking about connection and I'm not connecting with you. You can be sleeping in front of the computer right now and I wouldn't know, which that would be too sad. This is the book that Aaron was kindly introducing to you. I published this book at the beginning of the year. And it's been, people have liked the book, so I'm happy about that. And hopefully you will have the chance to take a look at it. Because we're going to talk about the mind, and we're going to talk about neuroscience. I wanted to clarify a few things. The first thing is that I want us to look at the body and the mind and the multidimensional beings that we are from a holistic point of view. We have become so used to see our bodies as machines that sometimes they don't work so well, and we need to fix. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about human beings that are multidimensional, that have many aspects, and we shouldn't, as therapists, we shouldn't be trying to fix anyone, but just living a journey with them, a journey with our clients. And part of that journey is, of course, helping them become better patterns, better parents. Our mind is not just the product of our brain chemistry. And this is a clarification that is really important to me, because doctors are now prescribing little kids. If they don't behave, they have ADD. If they don't pay attention, they have ADD. If they are a little moody, then they are bipolar. And they are medicating kids since they are like 2 years old. And this is too sad. And I think it comes from a misunderstanding of the relationship between the activity of the mind, the activity in the mind, and the behavior. So I want to clarify that there's absolutely no proof, no evidence that our mind is a product of brain chemistry. And even though there's a correlation between emotions and thoughts, and the activity in the mind, that also doesn't explain the mind or even consciousness. We know that there is something that activates in certain areas of the brain when we are experiencing certain emotions, like fear, for example. We know that the amygdala is activated, but that doesn't mean that the fear is in the amygdala. So it's important to make these clarifications. And if any of you have attended Daniel Siegel's seminars or have read about him, you know that he's been he's put this in the front of our arguments about what we do, is that we are probably one of maybe the only profession where we don't have a definition for the subject matter. So engineers know what what they are doing, the architects know what they are doing, and we don't really know what the mind of or consciousness is. So I want to clarify that, because we use these words a lot, and we're still learning certain processes that we don't understand that well. And so science is in the very early stages of research on love, empathy, and compassion. And I want just to give you a little anecdote about love, because I've been discussing about love and the stages of love and how you acquire for your first loving yourself as a baby, and then you learn to love your mom, and there's an evolutionary steps through which you acquire love, different kinds of love. But when I talked about love, that was always deemed as, what is this lady talking about? You know, you cannot talk about love and science at the same time. And so that was a little frustrating to me, and so I didn't talk about that a lot in public until like maybe 10 years ago, 11 years ago. I went to an event that happens every year in Washington, D.C. It's called the Psychotherapy Network, or maybe some of you have attended. And one of my big surprises when I attended this event in Washington is they actually were talking about love, and in you know, in the keynote presenters were talking about this, and so it encouraged me to look into it a little deeper. And one of the things that I wanted to clarify, because I am going to talk about some of the things that I don't consider, you know, a good practice in parenting. I want to clarify that I'm not criticizing parents. That's not my intention. My intention is not to say, you know, you've made mistakes. All of us have made mistakes. We have learned from these mistakes. Our children have trained us on how to be a parent. And I was glad to see that many of you guys diverged, 34% diverged from the parenting style that your parents use with you, which means that you have a critical mind, and that your parenting style was implemented out of maybe studying a little and examining yourself and being very aware of what you were doing and the effect that this was having on your children. There was this psychoanalyst, Winnicott, that lived the beginning, I think, mid-century, last century, in England, and he was a psychoanalyst, but he was also a psychiatrist, and he was seeing a lot of mothers, and the mothers came to him very concerned about, you know, with guilt because of the mistakes supposedly that they have made with children, and he came up with that expression of good enough parents. That's how he addressed them, say, you know, don't worry about that, you're a good enough parent. And I think this is a message that is important to convey to the people that we see in our practice. And this is my motivation to do this class. You know, I am terrified about what is happening in the world right now. I sometimes feel very discouraged, and bullying, and that many children end up in 2 million kids in America actually face a period of homelessness. So this is very sad. How did they end up homeless? And from an early age, probably since the age of emancipation. So this is very sad. And look at this. This is a little kid. He's 3 years old. This is not a fake picture. This is actually pictured from a documentary. And so you see this little kid. He's about 3 years old, and he's already snorting cocaine. And then you see on the other side, people doing drugs. So this has become so mainstream, and we will see the influence of that in discipline, in the sense of community, because kids have become so used to partying, and that has become a normal thing to do, that that has spread the coronavirus because of that. And the statistics are really sad regarding this. And of course, drugs do not give people the pleasure that they are looking for. They don't give, it's just a moment of elation and that's it. Or maybe it calms their anxiety. But actually, I believe that one of the big problems is that people are feeling very lonely, and that's why they drink so much and do drugs so much. And suicide has become the second leading cause of death. Look at the ages between 10 and 24. So it's starting to happen very early. And even though it says 10 to 24, you've seen probably reports of children as young as 7 years old who hang up in the closet or something. So something is not right. And we need to address that. So the state of affairs in the world is marked by narcissism, and we are contributing a little bit to what is happening when we push the kids to perform and compete, and because it creates rivalries instead of a sense of cooperation. And we have become very disconnected from our bodies. So we put in our bodies things that are not good for the body. We connect with others in a funny way, sometimes very utilitarian way, and we have disconnected from the planet, and we're actually destroying it. So this is not very promising right now. And one of the effects of disconnecting from the body is that the amygdala actually talks to us through the body. So you know that if your heart is racing, your amygdala is talking. And then the insula is what the part of the brain that processes your visceral feelings. So if something is going with your body and you're disconnected from the body, you don't read, you don't bring this information that comes to the insula doesn't become conscious, and it leads to a very automatic life. So I mentioned the lack of cooperation, and you know what is happening in the United States right now, and not only in the United States. So we're dealing with racism and segregation and fanaticism, and I think these problems reflect a lack of empathy and a lack of compassion. So you remember when most of you are counselors, and you remember when you graduated, or before you graduated, when you were studying, that one of the things that your teachers insisted on is that counselors have a role as advocates. So I think as a mental health counselor myself, one of the questions that I have in my mind constantly is how can I contribute to make of the world a better place? Even if it's a little contribution, it will always be meaningful. And again, I think that many of our clients are parents, and we can do something to have them do parenting in a different way, in a more compassionate way. And that will contribute to change what is happening in the world. I am going to list here a few misconceptions that we have in parenting pedagogy and counseling, and they are so widespread that we don't even question these misconceptions. So I'm just going to bring them to the fore. I'm pretty sure that many of you have already thought of these, but I'm going to bring them today so that we have them in the fore. So we tend to blame the child for their behavior. Very much, we blame them. And so sometimes one of the ways in which we blame them is by saying that the child was born wild. He's like that. We use those kind of expressions. He's like that. Since he was 2 months old, he started to do this. And in a way that has come to justify, for many parents, it has come to justify physical punishment or other kinds of punishment that we don't see as bad as physical punishment. And we have this idea that children need to be reined in, because otherwise they will grow wild. I don't know if you saw what was that movie? The Lord of the Flies, maybe, where you would but basically what this movie postulates is that if you're left alone, you end up like a savage, and that's not been proven, and that's not what you see in communities where parents do things in a different way. This is the other thing, the bad seed. So, this idea that there's a genetic predisposition, and I've heard this. I am a guardian ad litem, and I've heard this in court many times when the parents try to justify some of the things that they do, or try to justify the behavior of the child by saying the father was like that, or in my family everybody this, or in my family everybody that. And that's avoiding responsibility. And we also think in terms of hierarchy. So we like compliant childs, good mannered childs, and we want children who do not bother the parents. And we need to rethink that. What's a well-behaved child? Is the child understanding what he's doing, or we're just crushing their spirit? And the other thing that we tend to believe is that parents and teachers are always right. Other misconceptions, isn't that girl really cute? And we especially in certain cultures, and especially with men, we tend to believe that expressing emotions is not a good thing. So we keep, saying things like, don't cry, don't shout, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay drives me a little crazy, because the parents do say that a lot instead of acknowledging whatever the child is feeling. And we even promise sometimes. We see this in the movies all the time. I promise you that everything's going to be okay. You cannot promise that. And so that's a misconception, and it is reflected in the way we talk to the child. And you don't need to be a perfect parent to the child to turn okay. That's another misconception. And the other misconception, big one, is that we need to motivate the children to learn. So that's why we introduce forceful discipline to make them learn. And it includes, punishing them in certain ways, and taking away privileges and things like that. And it stresses the relationship, because a kid who's being punished like that will only feel resentful, nothing more. The result of that is the behavior can escalate. So our preferred method is punishment. It goes with rewards sometimes, but punishment is still everywhere the preferred method of education. And it comes from a false belief, that as I mentioned, that the child behavior needs to be corrected, and it escalates. So we don't want to do that. And the evidence is that punishment, any kind of punishment, causes pain. It can be emotional pain, or it can be corporal pain, but it does cause, it wounds the child, and it causes what is called a reactive attachment disorder. It affects the child's emotion regulation. So this is not a good thing. And we talk if you deal with children, if you deal with parents, you know that we're talking a lot about adverse childhood experiences. And just now they are starting to include harsh punishment into these adverse childhood experiences. So, when we talk about parenting, of course, it's not a cookbook that I can give you. Parenting is learned by doing it, and it is the patterns that lead us to do parenting. They are ingrained in our brain. There's the many millions of years that the mammalian brain developed the capacity to take care of the children. And now everybody's talking about empathy, and sometimes there's a misunderstanding about what empathy is. But now we know so many things about empathy as a phenomenon that has to do with communication, and it has to do with connecting with others, and socializing. Like there's a connection between certain aspects of empathy, like perspective taking and prejudice, for example. So kids who can take perspective are less prejudiced, and if you diminish the prejudice, you can help prevent intergroup conflict. I made a video that the image comes from a little video, animated video that I made to explain the main points in my book. And if you write to me, I'll send you the video. It's kind of a lovely video. It explains some of the things that we're talking about right now. So I believe that love is something that we need to love actively. I don't know if you've ever read the book by Eric Fromm. Eric Fromm wrote a book on the art of loving, and he talks about, he calls it an art because he wants to imply that this is something that you learn, and to learn something, it requires discipline, and it requires paying attention to what you're doing. Now we know about neuroplasticity these days, and we know that the brain of the child, especially young children, is very, very plastic. So this is the time where we want to teach the fundamentals of love, of empathy, of compassion. Neuroplasticity is helps us predict that the more we activate this, what we know now are the circuits of empathy, the more often our brain will respond to fear with not from the fight or flight response, we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but from the prefrontal cortex, the executive functions that allow us to regulate emotions and have compassionate responses. So we need to change the focus from a parenting based on fear, punishment, and rewards to a parenting that is focused on tending the emotional needs. You will see that we added two attachments. I don't know how you, probably Aaron is going to explain later how they can download those attachments. And one of the attachments is notes from Alison Schaefer, that she's a psychotherapist in Canada, and she's a very interesting lady. She follows Alfred Adler, and Adler said behavior has a purpose. So there's no behavior that doesn't have a purpose. And if we understand the purpose, then we correct the behavior without having to directly try to correct the behavior. And so the purpose of behavior is to satisfy a need. Once you satisfy that need, the behavior changes. So I started with the solutions before I go more in depth on the neuroscience of parenting. So Alison Schaefer proposes that there are four main needs, and she calls the needs the four C's, because all of them start with a C. So the first need is to feel connected. The second need is to feel as if they count. The third is to feel that they are capable. And the last one is to feel that they have the courage to withstand disappointment and imperfection. And I'll spend a minute talking about the last one, because one of the things that praising children is doing to children is they are not developing tolerance to frustration. And we don't let them withstand disappointment. Disappointment is part of life, and it is important for us to teach children how to withstand disappointment. Otherwise, they are not going to develop the capacity to tolerate frustration. This is her book. It's a very, very nice book. It's called Honey, I Wrecked the Kids, and I recommend it strongly. At the end of the presentation, you will see a list of recommended books. So I added here a few questions about, what's the role of the therapist? What can you do? And so one of the questions is, are you using psychoeducation? So this is a new thing. So probably the schools now are teaching about the importance of doing psychoeducation, which means teaching these things that I'm going to share with you today need to be taught to the parents. Need, how to do self-regulation, understanding that there's more than one system in the brain that responds to, or in the body that responds to stress. So I strongly recommend using psychoeducation if you're dealing with parents. And you can ask yourself, are you teaching empathy? You're probably modeling it because it's part of what we do, but can you actively teach empathy also? And if you see couples, do you find that lack of empathy is a problem in their communication? If you do, then teaching about empathy is very important, and devising some exercises that include, for example, active listening will help them develop empathy between them, and this will transfer to the children. Again, with families, you see that the lack of empathy is a problem. And what do you think that can be done to increase empathy in the context in which they are living? And especially now that still many children are at home studying online or homeschooling because of the coronavirus. And empathy goes through the window sometimes because things are very stressful and parents have lost their job or their income, or they are working at home, and so they have to juggle with too many things at the same time, and it becomes a problem. So we need to rethink a little bit our role in these aspects. So the family is the primary context. So for the formation of patterns of relationships, and the attachments, the attachment is formed in the family. So the way we connect to people is dependent on the parenting that we had, and also our emotional adjustment. And we will talk about that, increasingly talk about this. So parenting style determines the patterning of the relationships with others. And remember that this applies also to schools, because the schools is where the children spend most of the day. This is a big concern that I have, solidarity. And solidarity appears mostly when we're facing a crisis. But, coronavirus is a crisis, and it's not allowing us to display solidarity because we need to not come close to anyone. And again, interacting through Zoom or go webinars is not, it's not the same. So we don't have a break, for example, where we could socialize with others and understand what they are going through and display a little bit of this solidarity. But one of the things that coronavirus has done also is it has made us very aware, because it is a global thing. It is affecting the whole world. It is making us very aware of our interconnectedness. So maybe we can apply this to our life in the future also, when we realize that you need to be conscious of what the common humanity. You saw that movie, maybe. That's from the movie Inside Out, which is a very pretty movie to teach adults and children, not only children, about how all the emotions are important, and there are not such a thing as negative emotions. the emotions actually help us navigate the environment, and because they alert us about threats and also the availability of any rewards in the environment. So emotions are really, really important. But sometimes we end up having automatic responses and we annihilate the emotions. So we need to consciously learn to modulate the intensity of the emotions that we experience and be aware of when we're experiencing them and how we express them. And this is something that we can teach children from the beginning by not telling them it's going to be okay. So this is the book. We're going to talk about the 5 domains of parenting that come from the work of Daniel Hughes and Donald Bailey. This is a book that I strongly recommend, Brain-Based Parenting. And it is very focused on neuroscience and parenting. So you want to maybe get this book. So they talk about 5 domains. The first one, they call it the parental approach system. The second one is the reward system, the parental reward system. The third one is parental child reading system, that is about interpreting signs. Then you have the parental meaning-making system, and the parental executive system. The parental approach system is about the ability that we need to develop to come close to our children without feeling defensive, without fear of causing or getting into a conflict. And it is mediated by oxytocin. Oxytocin, you probably are very familiar with that, is called the bonding hormone. It has a role to play in approaching our others. And one interesting detail about oxytocin is that the receptors for oxytocin are more active in the presence of estrogens. So that explains why women tend to be more empathic than men. And also the endorphins have a role to play in when the parental approach system is activated. So as I said, we're hardwired for love. And we now know this hardwires happens at 3 levels. One is the genetic level, and they have identified a gene on chromosome number 3, and this chromosome seems to be very active in a part of the human brain that is called the striatum. And the striatum is activated when they do the functional MRI. The striatum is an area that is also activated when people are experiencing empathy. Now we know that there are certain brain circuits that are specific of empathy. And we also know about mirror neurons that are located in the inferior frontal gyrus and the premotor cortex and the parietal cortex in the anterior insula and the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. So we know that because we know about these mirror neurons that allow us to feel what the other is feeling, that these areas are active when we're experiencing empathy. Now, there are 2 different kinds of empathy. You have affective empathy and you have cognitive empathy. And mirror neurons are mostly about cognitive empathy. Sorry, affective empathy. So there's the automatic reaction that you have even when you're watching a movie and somebody's crying in the movie and you don't know why you're crying, knowing that there's an actor that is crying. But that's affective. It's like a contagion. You feel the pain of the other, or sometimes feel the happiness of the other. That's a way of feeling empathy. But the other kind of empathy is cognitive empathy. And cognitive empathy has to do with perspective taking. and sorry, and this has more to do with the prefrontal cortex. Now, we also know that there are certain neurotransmitters, as I mentioned before, and hormones that are involved in when we experience empathy. Now, it is interesting that these things have been studied not only in humans, but they have been studying these in gorillas, because most the gorillas have like 99% of the genes in a gorilla we have that in common with them. We share 99% of the genetic makeup. So they have studied a lot of things about love and empathy that manifest in gorillas. And there's enough evidence that love and compassion, caring for others, constitute an evolutionary advantage. And there's also enough evidence now that we tend to create attachments. Okay, here you have the empathy circuits. So you have the prefrontal cortex, that is where that's activated when we are experiencing cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy being the capacity that we have to understand what the other person is experiencing, even if we haven't experienced the same thing ever in our lives. And then we have the premotor area that I mentioned before, where mirror neurons are very high there. And you have the insular cortex and the limbic system. You have some mirror neurons there, but not so much, because the limbic system is involved in emotional empathy, but mostly through things like fear and threats. And then you have the temporal lobe that is related to memory, and it also plays a role in perspective taking, because you use what you can memorize about a situation to try to understand what the other person is going through. This is why it is so important that when we do parenting, we help parents go back to their own childhood and analyze the patterns that they learned there. What did you learn from your parents? Are you repeating the same patterns? Are you causing your children the same pain that your parents caused you? And there's no parents that are safe from that accusation of having caused pain to the children, because parenting is learned with them. This is Dr. Paul Gilbert. You might have heard of him. He is in England. He's the person who founded something called compassion-focused therapy. And he has developed a lot of work regarding this activity in the brain that is associated with emotional regulation. And so he's the one who came up with the idea that in the face of a stressor, we respond with changes, of course, not only in our emotions, but also in our physiology. And all the way, when we respond to a threat, there are not only emotional repercussions, there are also mental repercussions, as you know. And so he has come up with the idea that we have 3 emotional regulation systems. And these 3 emotional regulation systems are the systems with which we respond to stress. Different kinds of stress, but this is what it is. The one that you know very well about, which is the fight or flight. So we respond to a threat with this system. And you know that it activates the amygdala, and it activates especially the amygdala, basically the limbic system. And then we have the drive system that you also know as the rewards and pleasure system, that is related to incentives and resource seeking. And it helps us face the fear of being eliminated by a rival. And there's a third emotional regulation system that is called the soothing contentment system. And this is the new one. This is, we don't know very much about it yet. It was described by Shelley Taylor in 2020. And no, sorry, that's wrong. It was in 2000. It says 2020. It's in 2000. And it's all about affiliation. And it reduces fear caused by external circumstances and fear of loneliness. And it reduces that fear through the practice of empathy. So this is the system that gets activated, for example, when there's an earthquake and you go help your neighbors after the earthquake. And all the people who go volunteer to help, this is because this system is activated. These are the three systems again, so that you see them in a graphic way. I'll take a little bit of water. And so these emotional regulation systems are activated during acute physical crisis, chronic physical challenges, psychosocial crisis, and they depend, the response depends on the cognitive appraisal that we make of a stressful situation. Now, I'm jumping ahead to have us consider what fear causes children when we use fear in any ways as a parenting or educational strategy. So, for example, when fear motivates the parent to be overprotective, the parent is sending a message to the child about how capable this child is. It keeps the amygdala activated. It keeps the first system, the fight or flight system, activated because something bad can happen. If you give your child, if our parents give our children a no as a default answer, the child might start wondering, what, am I bad? Is the world a dangerous place? And if we push them to compete and achieve all the time, if parents and educators push children to compete and achieve, this kills empathy because they are creating rivals. They are comparing themselves all the time to other children, and that doesn't help emotion regulation either, because they activate the drive system, which is all about competing. And the question that the children might ask, it might not be a conscious question, but they are asking if they are a failure and if they are enough. This is a picture, very old picture that I took when I was a medical doctor in Colombia. We used to bring medical brigades to the jungle. And this is in a little place that we used to bring the brigades to. And I was amazed at how women cooperated all the time. So here, what they are doing is a very artisanal way of milling rice. So you see, they take these enormous things that are heavy, and they take turns to pound the rice to get it milled. And so this is, I'm not going to go through that. This is just a summary of what this Tend and Befriend system is about. It is an affiliative system, is based on empathy, it promotes feelings of content, safety, and connection, is mediated by oxytocin, and estrogens make the receptors to oxytocin more sensitive. But the problem with this system that we want to enhance and promote is that it is easily overridden by the threat system, which is the fight or flight, and also to a lesser degree by the drive system. The drive system is driven by, is the one that is mediated by dopamine. And there's an author called Fred Pravik, who says that we live in a dopaminergic society. It's a society that is all about achieving, performing, reaching status and fame and having money. And this race that we have as humanity has repercussions in the way we feel about each other. And it kind of annihilates this tend and befriend system that has the same circuits that I showed you for empathy. So we know from attachment theory that early interaction between the child and the primary caregiver is important, because the way we bond leaves is internalized and it leaves a pattern that will determine the way we associate, the way we affiliate with others, the way we interact with others. And so this attachment system in the parents is essential. We need to activate these empathy circuits to have this attachment with the parent function well. This is an important, this kind of interesting information. So in all mammals, there's an instinct to take care of others and congregate in search of support in moments of crisis. So it's not just humans. And the scientists I never know how they determine these things, but it is kind of interesting because they say this instinct appeared 120 million years ago, and it's a soothing physiological system. So you see, that's why we look for support groups, and that's why the charity organizations exist, and the ashrams and the monasteries, because these collectives soothe people. The sense that we can function in a group, that we can support each other, it enhances the tend and befriend system. Now, there's something interesting that, I don't know if any of you are stringent feminists, but I brought this idea to feminists, and sometimes they don't agree with me, because we've been told that, the patriarchal society relegated women to certain functions. And when you delve a little into what functions women were relegated into, you find that is the medical professions, where women are a lot more than in any other profession. And you find more women there. And you find that women are sometimes relegated to taking children, not only in the home, but also in childcare and preschools and things like that. And in volunteering, also, there's more women taking volunteer functions. And we kind of think about it like we were relegated to these functions. But even though that's partly true, it is also because taking care of, we do that well. Taking care of others is our strength, and it is because we are more empathic. And it has an evolutionary reason behind it. Is the role of the mother in the upbringing. I mean, maybe in these days where we function a little different, it is not so important that the mother stays home. But imagine even the times where we were hunters and gatherers, and the women were pregnant and with children, it was a little bit more difficult for them to go hunting and gathering, and they had to stay home. So they started to take these functions of taking care of the children. And men have a little different response to stress, because in addition to adrenaline, cortisol, and dopamine, they produce testosterone. And testosterone associated with the dopamine promotes more competitive and aggressive behaviors. So there's a little difference. It's real. There's an anatomical and physiological reason why women and men function a little different. This is just a soothing image of, you probably have memories of being with friends around the fire. And I want you to bring that memory now and remember, why was it soothing? Why did it feel so good? People telling stories and we paying attention. And so this coming together, there's something, the brains synchronize in a certain way, and we start to do something that is called co-regulation. And this is a very old practice. And this is where the 10th and befriend circuits activate in the brain. This is my idea. I think that if we think in terms of the collective, if we care for the collective, if we care for others, then we will be inclined to serve. And that if we are inclined to serve, we are inclined to bond with each other. And when we bond, we soothe each other, and then we thrive. And this concept is important for me in regards to parenting, because if we teach this to children, we are activating, we're making sure that the brain is activating the prefrontal cortex. It is activating the insula and the mid cingulate cortex. And what happens is, because of neuroplasticity, is these areas are going to grow, and the kid is going to grow up to be more caring. And this will have an influence in everything that is happening in society. This is just an image of bonding that I thought it was really cute. That's from the video also, working together that we cannot do now. Now, there is a parental reward system also. And this image is from, I don't know if you know this guy, and I can't remember the name right now. I should have written down. This is a guy who started from when his child was very little. He started participating in the Boston Marathon. And the kid couldn't come because he had cerebral palsy. But the father would come and bring the kid in a cart and run together. And they still do that. It's been for many years. They are very famous. And so this is a way of sharing achievements, and it activates the reward system in the brain. And the parental reward system refers to those activities that we do with the children that we enjoy. When you enjoy doing things together, carpentry or cooking or gardening, and where they don't need to be so many rules. It's not so regulated. They are more spontaneous activity. And this is, if we activate the parental reward system that is mediated by dopamine and serotonin, and of course the limbic system that produces the dopamine, then you will see more success in parenting. The opposite is when you stimulate competition. I'm not going to read that quote. You can read it later. So you remember that I mentioned the dopaminergic society. So this system also exists, and this parental system is associated with the production of dopamine in the limbic system. And the dopamine relieves the stress through the pursuit of pleasure, you know that, right? So if parenting becomes a pleasurable situation, a pleasurable activity, then you receive that really nice moments. That's your pleasure. The individual is motivated when the dopaminergic system is activated. The individual seeks to compete and sometimes go into risky activities, and that's what stimulates the production of dopamine. And then it's interesting because when we get too much dopamine, we're so excited that we become anxious and nervous and cannot stop and cannot rest. And so we do activities that soothe us. So one of the reasons why yoga, for example, and meditation have become such a mainstream practices is because the dopaminergic system will keep it activated all the time. So these are two things that we can do with the children also. We can help them do the regulation of the dopaminergic system by doing yoga with them, for example. And then there is the parental reading system. And I'm not talking about reading books with them bedside. We respond to the inner experience of the child and not to their behaviors. Because this is what I've been talking about. We want to connect with the child. So when the child is feeling sad, we inquire, what's going on? Tell me, you can trust me. Let's see, we can solve this together. And that's the reading system. Sometimes the child won't talk, either because they are too little or because they are not verbal or because they are shy or because they are ashamed of what they are feeling, whatever it is. You need to learn as a parent how to understand what is going on in them. You know, Dan Siegel developed the concept of mindsight, which is developing the ability to understand the child, and that's mediated by the parental reading system. And the reading system is associated with perspective taking. And we already said that that's one of the qualities of empathy. So you already know that this is a cognitive function, and the prefrontal cortex will be activated when we exercise the perspective taking capability. And then there is the meaning making system. And because now you're sleeping a little bit, because this has gone for a while, I bring a joke. So we sometimes look for meaning in the wrong places, right? So the meaning making system refers to the capacity of the parents to edit all the scripts that come from the way they were parented and develop a narrative that is coherent and that will guide their parenting. We need, in order to develop this system, we need to make sense of our past experiences. This is where the temporal lobe comes in. And you want to activate the temporal lobe, the hippocampus, and bring those memories that will help you make sense of what happened with your parents, and understanding that everything that we know about love, everything that we know about relationships, and everything that we know about parenting as children, parenting, we learn it as children. And so as therapies, we can help parents edit their old scripts. We explore their stories so that they can approach their child unburdened by unresolved pain. So when people come to me, for example, with anxiety, and they're anxious because the relationship with the parent, with their children is stressed, and they don't know what to do, and they don't know if they are doing well, and they are really stressed about it. One of the things that we always do is, besides the first aid kits to alleviate the anxiety, whatever it is that you do, little meditation or relaxation, or having them walk a little bit more to reduce anxiety. Besides of those things, you want to discuss with them what happened when you were a child. How were you parented? What are your definitions of love? What are your definition of a relationship? How do you see your role as a parent? We are not prepared for that. We learn it in, or on the way. And then you have the parental executive system, which is what helps us coordinate and regulate our internal states. This is a very important system, because here is what not only we learn how to develop a capacity to regulate our own emotions, but we also co-regulate with others. It involves monitoring the relational quality that we have with our children and taking action to repair the relationship when we need to repair it. And it relies on a well-functioning anterior cingulate cortex and also the orbital frontal cortex, because those two areas are the ones that inhibit the activity of the amygdala. And the activity of the amygdala is what keeps us being emotional and fearful and responding with fight or flight. So what is emotional regulation then? So it is the ability to respond to the ongoing demands of experience mindfully. It includes a range of emotion that we need to accept, and we need to respond to those emotions in a socially tolerable and sufficiently flexible manner, so that we don't crush the spontaneous reactions, but we can delay certain reactions that are not proper for the moment. So we don't suppress anything, but we modulate the experience and the expression of emotions. So there's a difference between emotion regulation and emotion control or self-control. Self-regulation happens at in different places. So there's a sensory receptors. They control the perceptual and experiential input. And so for example, if a kid is reacting to somebody spontaneously and that's bringing an emotional reaction, what we do is we try to change the attention or shift the attention to try to modify the context. And so we avoid the stressful, the fight or flight response. And self-regulation also happens at a central level where we process information, and that's mostly the prefrontal cortex. And it refers to our ability to change the meaning of what has happened. So for example, if a parent sees the child terribly stressed about something that happened in a school, we listen to them, we pay attention to the narrative, we see how he's interpreting the narrative or she's interpreting the narrative, and we try to see if there's another meaning that we can assign to the same events. And by shifting the interpretation of the events, we help them self-regulate. There is something else called selective response, which is when we consciously select how to respond to any state that is emotionally related. So that's when you use techniques like taking a deep breath, or maybe shouting, or maybe, I don't know, going for a run. And so it's a certain response where you help the kid regulate his response to emotions. This is very important. This is essential because sometimes just our presence makes a difference. The way we're taking something, if we're not driven by our emotions, the child gets calmer. So children learn to regulate emotions by observing the parents. This is just a recommendation of certain self-regulation steps that we can follow or can teach our parents, where we identify stressors and reduce them. Let's start with that. And then we help them gain self-awareness. And you can do any exercise that can come with just close your eyes, be aware of the place where you are right now, be aware of your body, see if you are carrying any tension in your body, check your shoulders, etc. So by bringing the attention to the body, you help the kid regulate the emotions. You, besides self-awareness, you can also help them define some strategies that they can use when they're agitated. See, there's a difference between being on your own when you're agitated and sending the kid into, how do you call that? Timeout. There's a difference. I don't like timeouts. I think it creates a lot of frustration, but we can tell the child, maybe you need to be on your own right now. And even the way we phrase it makes a difference. You're on timeout. That's something different. When you're ready, we can talk it out. Just let me know when you're ready and we can talk it out. And we help them express feelings with words. You're not ready to talk? Okay, let's go for a walk. And you know that when you're walking, you release endorphins and you get a little less emotional. And the other thing that we do for self-regulation with the parents and the children is to learn them recognize the triggers. I have my patients sometimes make a journal. Whenever you feel like this, just examine what happened in the past hour and see if you can recognize what triggered these emotions. And this gives a lot of clues on what's going on, and it will make them more aware of how to deal with certain situations. Remember when we talk about the co-regulation of affection? These are hands. This is a beautiful picture of hands. Everybody's holding hands and to create this figure. And it represents the co-regulation of affection. So people are happy in a party. That's simple, right? Usually all the people in the party are happy, and that's because you're co-regulating affection. That's the simple example of what happens. And so whatever the atmosphere in the house is, the children will take on that. See, if the caregivers are self-regulating, the kids are going to be self-regulating also. The parents, the teachers, the mentors, all of them need to learn how to promote that emotional regulation, because that leads to good care. Now, this is what happens also. This is the other thing that we need to talk about, because not everything is rosy in parenting, right? So in many occasions, we are frustrated. We don't want to deal with it. We want to run away. And so Hughes and Bailing in their book, they describe what happens when we block our parenting systems. And there are four kinds of block care that can result from when a parent is terribly stressed, when they are having difficult times, or they're going through intrapersonal conflict or interpersonal conflict, and they block parenting in many ways. So there are two ways, there's chronic and there's acute block care. Acute block care is not so terribly bad because sometimes the parent is just experiencing an emotional blow. For example, somebody died in the family or they lost their jobs and they go into shock, and so the parenting systems are going to go down. They are not activated. But this is acute, so it's temporary, and it will pass. And then but it can become chronic, and it refers, when we talk about chronic block care, we're talking about specific triggers that make the parent so overwhelmed, so emotional, that they cannot deal with their own experiences, and they become what we call toxic. And so they ignore the children, or sometimes they abuse the children because of that, because all the parenting systems are blocked. And sometimes the child participates in that blocked system because the child can become unresponsive to the parents' caregiving. And that happens a lot, for example, with foster care children. And sometimes when the child is adopted and the child is not a baby, then that also happens. And so parenting can also be blocked when parents have very specific expectations of what the child should do, and they don't receive a response from the child is still not doing what they want them to do, and so the parents block the parenting systems. So what can we do in those cases? So I believe in conscious evolution. I believe that we have so much knowledge that is available to us, and we have developed a consciousness that is, we can enhance it even more, but we have developed a consciousness that is very peculiar in this time of humanity, and we can evolve consciously. Instead of doing things automatically, we can evolve consciously. And we can educate children for love and not in fear. And we can multiply the acts of kindness and expose children to kindness, giving them opportunity to experience empathy. We're developing a very nice project with the Florida Gulf Coast University right now. And they actually have right now 3 classes that they are offering to the students. One class, the 3 classes are about kindness, and 2 of the classes include going to out to the community, and specifically to schools, to start teaching empathy and involve children in the learning of these skills. And I think it's going to be fantastic, and I really believe that we need to do more in that area. So can we nurture children for wholeness? So if you want to read more about parenting techniques and things like that, I recommend that you research a little about inductive discipline, because it takes children to recognize what is going on, see how they are managing their relationships with others. If they hurt somebody, you get them to reflect on what happened, the consequences of what happened, and to take perspective. Say, okay, so if you were in his or her position, how would you have felt? And when we do that, we get the children to act with more care and more kindness. You can teach Mindsight, and maybe you want to look into programs like Mind Up. This is a curriculum that exists in several districts in school districts in the country, and now is starting to get abroad. And it's interesting because what they use mindfulness, and they use they teach the children about the brain. They teach the children how the brain works, and they teach them about these systems, you know, how you can self-regulate and control your amygdala and take a deep breath and get your prefrontal cortex to be more activated. And this is the results of this program has been very interesting. And you have also another program that is called the Roots of Empathy, that is started in Canada. It's been there for a while, I think 24, 25 years, and they have achieved great results. Now we can teach children and parents a little bit about compassion meditation so that they do the cognitive reappraisal instead of just expressive suppression. So the cognitive reappraisal, we mentioned it before, is to consider things from a different perspective so that you can modulate your stress or emotional regulation systems. We mentioned mindfulness again already, and we want to, as therapists, we want to tend the wound. That's where we were talking about, going back to the time where we were children, and we reflect on what happened to us and what was traumatic, and we tend that wound. With children, one of the things that is very interesting is that there's research that shows that stimulating awe makes us more benevolent. So that's an interesting piece of information there. And we can also encourage cooperation at home, you know, that will connect with the 4 C's. They will feel included. They will feel that they count. They will participate in the things that are happening in the home. And at the same time that they are cooperating, they are connecting with us. And for parents, and you know, we can recommend them to get a tutor, a mentor, a counselor, or a peer, so that they can, if they cannot self-regulate on their own, that will help them. Now this is clicking and not going to the next one. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay, so this is the time where we go to questions, Aaron, if you want to open. There might be some questions.
All right, let's see what questions we have now. We don't actually have any questions entered in yet. We do have a comment that was actually made closer to the beginning of your time presenting today, where Barb said, "Your warm personality is welcoming. I feel connected." When you were talking about some of the difficulties with feeling connected when you're presenting for a webinar instead of being in person with people. So folks, if you have some questions, feel free to post them in the questions box.
Can I see the questions? I don't remember what is the chat one. Oh,
yeah, there's a little, there is a box that says, or a little triangle next to questions, hopefully, that you see. We are getting a couple coming in now. And Jennifer's asked, can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? And we're not sharing the PowerPoint today, but we do have 2 handouts that we're providing to everybody.
And everybody's going to get the recording, right?
Yes, as long as you complete the evaluation survey, you will also get a link to the recording, although it could take as much as a couple of days before that link's available because of video editing.
So, you know, if you're very interested in the PowerPoint presentation, I'll be happy to send you a PDF. But, you know, you can email me, and my email is really easy. My business is called Eyes Wide Open. So Eyes Wide Open, EWO and then LLC, like in limited liability company, at yahoo.com. That's my email, EWOLLC@yahoo.com. If you want to ask any questions, I'm available. But I would like,
Awesome.
I really would like to see some comments and questions. So everybody, I'm always scared when nobody asks any questions.
Nancy has asked, are the slides you used from your book?
If the material comes from my book, is that the question?
Yeah, does the material in the slides come from your book? Will they find that information?
Only some of it. Only some of it. Only some of it, and every slide has a reference, and I'll give you a now I'll show the books that I recommend. So some of the things, like when I was talking about the parental systems, I was based on the book by Bailing. What's it? I always forget the name of the other guy. Let me see. It's Bailing and Hughes. It's Hughes and Bailing. That book's a really excellent book to look into. I also quoted Alison Schaefer, and you heard me mentioning her with a lot of praise, and little, different articles, and all the references are on the bottom of the respective slide.
Okay. We have a question from Cynthia who asks, do you think narcissism is caused by mutated empathy genes?
Oh, that's an interesting question. There's been, all I know about it, not too much, not mutated genes, but I know that there's been some research on what is the connection between this gene is just being discovered, so there's not a lot of information about that. There's genes need to express, so if the conditions in the environment are not conducive to the expression of the gene will not express. So that will be the genetic association that I see. I think that empathy, in a way, is the reverse of narcissism, if that's what you want to imply. I think that when empathy is not nurtured, you don't develop these circuits in the brain that will help us connect with each other. The responses that you learn are not conducive to that affiliation response. So that's the connection that I see. Now, if we live in times that are very individualistic. So how do we connect? From an empathic point of view, is difficult if the environment, if the society at large, if the leaders are not empathic. That's I don't mean to be political here, but there's actually an interesting research on how bullying increased, and it's called the Trump effect, actually, in the research. After the big leader, the president of a country becomes an example for the whole country. So is the guy narcissistic? I believe so. It doesn't seem to have a lot of empathy expression.
All right. Well, the next question is from Jane, who says, please say more about timeout, as it was the last big step parents took as an alternative to spanking.
Yeah, it is. I have radical ideas about education because we had a school in Cartagena, and this school was all about no fear. We discouraged fear, anything that encouraged fear. So we didn't. I'm going to tell you how radical this school was. There were no tests. There was no exams. The children didn't have homework. and the teachers didn't teach, they facilitated. They were sitting with the children. They could advance at their own pace. See, one of the mistakes that let me go make a circle here. So one of the mistakes that we make is to think that there's a right or wrong way of behaving, that there's a right or wrong way of doing things, and we want to put the kids in that kind of rail, and so the lack of flexibility deals with extreme measures, it leads to extreme measures, and I think timeout is one of those. It causes distress. It causes emotional pain, a lot of emotional pain, and emotional pain only creates resentment. So there are a lot of research. If you look up, you're going to find a lot of research on timeout not being very effective in changing anything, because maybe you change the behavior because of the fear, but on the long run, it doesn't attend to the emotional need of the child. The child is misbehaving for a reason. There's a purpose to that behavior. He is trying to express something. And if we don't attend to that need, then he will continue to do it, no matter if you do timeout or not. So you will need to escalate the punishment. Whatever you're doing, you will need to escalate it, because it is not going to work. So that's why you find the father who said, okay, if you don't do your homework, you don't see your friends until blah, 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 right? And so he's so resentful that then you need to say, I'm going to take away your privileges and da, 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 da. And you continue escalating, and you don't understand what's going on. You think the problem is with the child. No, the problem is with the discipline that you're establishing. And so anything that causes emotional pain should be eliminated from parenting and education. This is my radical point of view about that, because we have alternatives, and we mentioned some of these alternatives. We mentioned how important it was to connect with the child, to try to read and understand what they are going through, to help them express what they are going through, and if they don't have the words, we teach them the words, and we talk about our own emotions so that they know how to express them, and that it is okay to express emotions. I hope that this answered the question.
Well, next we have a comment from Nancy, who says, your presentation was beautiful, was very beautiful, as a very specific way to go about helping our children while parenting. So much of it refers back to the parent's own upbringing, and what is much more important to understand, the neuroscience of the developmental stages.
Okay.
And we have a question from Maria. When is the frontal lobe of the brain developed, and does it affect the levels of empathy and compassion that you spoke about?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, it is interesting because I don't know that we can talk in terms of when it is developed. Is it developed in the womb? But when the baby is born, all the lobes are formed, and the baby has a lot of connection, a lot of synapses that are going in all directions, So one of the things that happens is the experiences of the kid start pruning these connections. They refine the connection. So this connection hasn't been used, we killed it. The brain kills it. So if your definition of developing the frontal lobe is about that will answer that part of the question, and it is dependent on experience. So the more synapses is used, the more that part of the brain is activated and functional. So a frontal lobe has a lot of functions, not just one, but the prefrontal cortex is the most important in cognitive functions and in self-regulation. When we're talking about the affiliative response, that response that we call the tend and befriend response, we were talking about the necessity to respond not just from the amygdala, not just from the dopaminergic system, but from the executive functions of in the brain, which are mostly in the prefrontal cortex, right? And so this is developed. So even the kid has, yeah, the cognitive functions develop over time, and they, according to Piaget, we don't have the full cognitive functions until maybe 12 years old. We're probably 12 years old, but it's there. It is there. It's just the connections that you're making that will enhance those connections and help us be more logical.
Okay. So our next question is, how do you think addiction affects a parent's ability to teach or show empathy and self-regulation skills to children?
What was the first question? The first part of the question?
How do you think addiction
Oh,
affects
addiction,
parents'
addiction.
ability
Wow.
to teach or show empathy and self-regulation skills to children?
Well, if there's drug addiction in the parents, well, something is already very wrong, right, in the brain, because some of the circuits, the normal circuits that help us function and regulate emotions, have been hijacked. So it is, it affects it in all ways, It depends on what kind of drug and that they are using. Different systems are hijacked, but it is, what we see is a person under the influence of any drug. It cannot use the resources that we were talking about, cannot fully use the parental systems that we talked about. Yeah, that would be what I would say about that.
All right. The next question is from Brittany. Are there any recommendations about adapting these concepts and the components of each system to parenting a child who's experienced trauma or has a higher ACE score?
A higher what?
ACE score, like as in the ACE questionnaire, adverse childhood experiences, or something along those lines.
ACE, you meant?
Uh,
Okay. So
yeah.
what you're talking is how to apply. See, if we have a child who has experienced trauma or traumatic incidents, and or these kind of events in childhood, how do we apply parenting to? Okay. So children are resilient. They are very resilient, right? And trauma can be treated, and that because we know that as counselors that trauma can be treated. So in my experience personally, it takes a time with the person who has been traumatized. It takes a little longer time to create an attachment, to create a connection. But once you create the connection, once you create that connection, is the same things are valid, because you work on the trauma on one side, but you also introduce new ways of parenting or new ways of say, for example, I don't know exactly what the question refers to, but say, for example, that I adopt a child. I'm too old to adopting, but if somebody adopts a child who has gone through a lot of trauma, how do we deal with that? And what you deal with that is of course you do therapy, but on the other side, what you do is you apply those parenting, you stimulate those parenting systems to make sure that you don't block parenting again because of the behavior of the kid. Because if you do that, then the kid is going to be re-traumatized. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So our next question is, what is your position on ABA therapy?
On what?
ABA therapy.
I'm terrible with acronyms, so remind me what ABA is. That's the behavioral what? I can't.
Maybe, Brittany, what you could do is clarify what you mean by ABA therapy. I forget exactly what it stands for, but I believe that's the therapy that is often used with
Out.
children with autism or developmental
Yeah,
disorders,
that's what I thought. What
or
and the
behavioral
question,
analysis, I think.
yeah, behavioral analysis. That's what it is. So
Yeah,
what?
applied behavioral
Yes,
analysis.
that's what it is. I remind me the question.
Yes. The question is, what is your position on ABA therapy?
I don't have a position. Well, you see, there's something interesting that I'm going to confess here. Um, the United States is more behavioral. You know, the all the therapeutic field is a lot more behavioral than anywhere in the world. For some reason, I don't know why, but that's the way it is. Okay, so it was a surprise to me, you know, that I suffered during the exam that I took to get my license because most of the questions were about cognitive stuff that I didn't know. And so I come from a more psychodynamic, psychoanalytical kind of background. Even when I went to Canada to do my master's, it was a lot more psychoanalytic, psychodynamic. So I have resisted, I confess that, I have resisted behavioral therapies. And what research says is that they can be effective, but the results might not be as lasting. Now, I've seen that they work with kids who have been within the autistic spectrum. I've seen that they have good results with the kids. So that would be my position. That I think that in certain cases it can be very effective, but if I had a choice, I would use a more psychodynamic, more empathy-based or compassion-based therapy.
All right. So our next question is maybe one that you've already partially answered with a similar question, but I'll ask it just in case there's more you want to say about it. It's how does the use of drugs and alcohol impact the development of the empathy circuits?
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I would say I don't know exactly how. Um, I, there's one thing that we know about this, the pleasure, the dopaminergic system. Let's call it that. The way it works is it affects the brakes of that system. You know, the drugs affect the brake of that system. So usually the dopaminergic system is involved in empathy also. You need a little bit of dopamine to be empathic because it is all about motivation and need to connect and all of that. And there needs to be some implicit reward in being empathic, right? If you're empathic with somebody and it becomes a pleasurable situation, then that's your reward. The problem with drugs is you broke the system. You broke the dopaminergic system to the point where the prefrontal cortex do not apply the brakes, right? And if it is not applying the brakes, then it is very difficult to control responses. So even if a person who has an addiction is trying to have an empathic response, there are certain things that trigger the amygdala a little bit more, or the reward becomes more important than any behavior, then there's not going to be an empathic response. Make sense?
All right.
Yeah.
Yes. Monik asks, how should a parent deal with a tantrum without reinforcing the behavior and still meeting the child's emotional needs?
Oh my gosh. Ideally, the child will not do tantrums. My child never did a tantrum, so I'm very lucky. It's not a child anymore. Yeah. There's a little video on YouTube. You can pull it up. It's very nice. It's a little kid. He's all naked and is absolutely out of control. He's probably less than 2 years old, and he's totally out of control. And the father sits in front of the kid and is there. He's with his arms open, just showing the kid that he's there. He's there to protect. He's kind of guarding the space for the kid. is making this terrible tantrum that he cannot control a safe place to be. So it is not applying any behavioral techniques to that. He's just there for the child. And little by little, the child calms down and it starts touching. The father just touches him a little bit on the back. He touches him on the arm. He touches him a little bit more. And little by little, the kid calms down. And that's the only thing that we can do sometimes when it is uncontrollable, you know. But hopefully a kid who has learned to express emotions and self-regulate do not need to make a tantrum. The tantrum is it's an extreme expression of distress.
Hopefully somebody will find that video and send a link to us all, maybe.
Right.
To watch it.
Fine. There was a lady from Bogota, La Javeriana. Is she still there? She wants to ask any questions. She has to just, let me say hello to her because she sent a greeting at the beginning, right?
Yes. I think it was Beatrice.
Beatriz.
I want to say.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
So hello, Beatriz.
So Karen says, thank you so much. Your presentation was so informative. You can see your passion for children and the way that they're parented. It's contagious. And Michelle asks the question, how can parents address their own guilt due to substance use and separation so they can improve their bond with the children?
Oh, I'm being honest. Being honest. There are reasons why a person gets into drug addiction, right? There are many reasons. And sometimes it's pain, emotional pain that has not been treated in any other way. Sometimes it's just could be a genetic thing that had make them get hooked very soon. You know, this person who was being a drug addict also needs to experience compassion and can express remorse for any harm that he might have caused because of any behaviors that he or she might have had during a state of, you know, of addiction. But I think it works. I remember I had an aunt. She is not related to drug addiction, but this aunt had this beautiful thing with her children that I witnessed so many times, and I thought, oh, it would be so nice if my parents would do that, you know. And she said, "Perdón," you know. She would come to the children and say, "I'm sorry, I really made a mistake there. Yeah, I was unfair there. Yeah, I should not have done that." And it created such warmth in the relationship, you know. So I think the children understand. So, you know.
Okay. Well, the next question is from Maria. Does this also apply to those with other disorders like bipolar or schizophrenia? This is to follow the question on how drugs affect the empathic abilities.
There's research on that, actually. You know, she mentioned bipolar and schizophrenia, right? I am not very familiar with the research on bipolar, but I am familiar with the research on schizophrenia and empathy. And they say that their circuits, the empathy circuits, are impaired, especially the ones that allow the person to take perspective. You know, so I like a definition. This Batson says that there are 4 elements of empathy, and 2 refer to cognitive empathy, the other 2 to affective empathy. And the 2 major ones are perspective taking, that refer to cognitive, and the other one is about empathy, empathic concern, which is compassion, right? And so there are certain things that, for example, you know, many people with what we used to call schizophrenia are very brilliant and very intelligent and very brilliant, and they might be able to express the cognitive type of empathy, but they have a lot more trouble connecting, the affective side of empathy, connecting and having this emotional contagion with the other, or being able to take action to alleviate the stress of the other. Those two things can be more impaired in the person with the schizophrenia.
Okay. We also, Beatrice says, great presentations, thanks for the greeting. And Barb says, love all the research into compassion and brain chemistry. I currently facilitate grief support groups and find it very helpful to add the topics of compassion and empathy into the group discussions. Any resources on teaching compassion with adults?
Oh, you know what? Paul Gilbert, the guy that I mentioned, I love his work. He's the one who has the compassion therapy. Paul Gilbert, anything with him is absolutely beautiful, and yeah, I would strongly recommend him. Okay, I was gonna look about. Let me see, I have something here very handy. Let me see. Come on. Okay, so we have Mindful Compassion by Paul Gilbert. That book is, you can get it in. Oh, come on. And then you have, oh, well, there are so many books, but that one is really nice. Okay, it's Mindful.
All right. I know we have to wrap things up. One more comment from Beatrice. Latest news on schizophrenia globally indicated that people from Africa thought Oz their voices as friends, probably a typo there, versus USA thought of voices as aggressive. Okay, people with schizophrenia from Africa thought of their voices as friends, whereas people in the USA thought of them as aggressive. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
ask her, please, Beatrice, share that research with me. Again, my email ewollc@yahoo.com. Okay, you want to connect with me.
I do just want to remind.
Thank you to the Florida Mental Health Association for this opportunity to be here with you guys. I am very grateful for this time that you have given me, and Aaron, you've been extraordinarily helpful with all the technical part of it and everything. So I'm very, very grateful. Let me.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Casabianca.
Can I show the last slide?
You sure can.
I don't know how to do that. Okay, how do I go back to my
Please
slide?
left click on your PowerPoint icon on the bottom of your screen, probably.
I don't have an icon, so I don't know what. Oh, here, maybe. No. Hey, how do I make? Oh, here it is. Okay.
There you go.
Just let me show you this little quote. Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness the energies of love, and then, for the second time in the history of the world, man will have discovered fire.
That is a beautiful quote to end on. And I want to thank you very much, Dr. Casabianca, for your expertise and for spending time with us today, enlightening us with your wisdom and information. And I want to remind everyone to complete your CE evaluation form, which should pop up in a moment. But if you don't get it now, then you'll get it in a follow-up email in an hour. Make sure you do it tonight, though, so we can enter your attendance tonight in the CE Broker. And I want to wish everyone a happy and fulfilling weekend, and also hope some of you will join us for our next webinar entitled Ambiguous Loss, Experiential Intervention for Clients Experiencing the Guilt of Ambivalent Reactions in Transgender Families, with Maria Juliana, licensed mental health counselor, on Friday, September 25th from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. We will wish you all a happy and fulfilling weekend, and we'll see you next time.
happy weekend to all of you. Thank you very much, Aaron. Take care. Bye-bye.